So I hope
Thank you, sir. We'll have a
hope
small.
I haven't bored everybody to tears. And
We'll have a
I thank you
small
very much.
question and answer session with you, if you.
Could anyone possibly have a question?
I think so. Would you like to have a seat?
Right here. Are you sure you want to sit through any more of this?
No, that's fine. All right. The first thing I'd like to ask you is this your first trip to India?
It is. It is indeed.
So how do you find India?
Well, I got here. I'm trying to remember when I got here. I got here yesterday morning, and I mean, I'm still suffering a little bit of culture shock because it is so vastly different from anything I've ever experienced. I mean, I've traveled quite a bit. I've been to Cuba. I've been to a lot of countries, and I've never experienced anything like this. I still have to wrap my head around it. It's absolutely amazing.
All right. And what do you think about the Comic Con India?
Well, I've been to more comic conventions than you can possibly imagine, and I haven't been to one quite like this. Four-fifths of which is outdoors. It's kind of amazing. I mean, it reminds me a little bit of conventions from the 1970s in America. I mean that in a good way. Yeah.
Sure. I'll reprise some of the questions we asked you for the Indian Comics Journal, the interview we did with you.
Oh, yes.
So just for the audience, we'll ask some of the questions from here.
Oh boy.
So
This isn't going to be redundant.
no, I don't think so. Most of them have not read it yet. So by this, if you want to read the full version, we'll have a shorter version right
Or
now.
not.
So did you start Fantagraphics as a primarily a graphic novel publisher, or was the Comic Journal your original plan?
No, we had no idea we'd publish comics. We were only interested. I mean, I was majoring in journalism in my third year of college, and one of the things I flirted with was being a journalist. But then I realized I couldn't just walk into the Washington Post and they would hire me to cover the national beat, and I was very restless. And so we only wanted to publish a magazine about comics.
All right.
And we wanted to publish a magazine that practiced real journalism, which most fanzines never did.
All right. So how did it get into graphic novels?
Well, they just landed in our lap. We were well distributed in the comic book market, and so we had this infrastructure. We work with all the distributors, and like I said, the Hernandez brothers sent us their comic, and I thought it was fantastic. So we really just fell into publishing comics. We never planned to do that.
All right. Which of the titles you've published and the creators you've worked with is your personal favorite?
Oh, how did I answer? I mean, I think I answered this in a clever enough way so as not to commit myself to any.
You did commit to someone.
I have a soft spot for the Hernandez brothers.
Yeah.
We're dear friends. We started publishing them in I think 82, so I've known them well since then. We're celebrating their 30th anniversary this year. Yeah, they're probably the softest spot I have. They're great guys. I think they're brilliant cartoonists. I'm really proud to publish them.
All right. The Comics Journal is known for its detailed interviews with comics artists and harsh critiques and edgy editorials. Is the Comic Journal's opinionated edge a reflection of your own temperament and views?
Did I answer that in there?
Yes, you did.
Well, for good or ill, it is. Very, very much so. I mean, especially in the first 15 years of it. One of my goals was really to be a burr under the saddle of mainstream comics publishers, and we succeeded in doing that. I mean, there was a point in the early 1980s when I was actually banned from the Marvel Comics offices. They wouldn't let me go there anymore because of news stories we ran or interviews we ran or something like that. So the point of the magazine was to be a contentious magazine and to be in opposition to what was then the status quo of comics publishing.
All right.
And that does.
All right.
reflect.
Apart from this, how important do you think that kind of journalism is for the industry?
Oh, well, I think that kind of journalism, I mean, I think it's important for everything. I think it's important for the world, and that there ought to be more of it. I mean, I think it was important, it was especially important at the time because the Comic Journal represented this rallying point where cartoonists who were also dissatisfied with the status quo, or cartoonists who were being screwed over by publishers, could go and have their stories told. And prior to that, there was no place for them to be heard. So I think especially in the, in the 80s and 90s, that was important.
All right. Again, you talked about it here as well, and we had asked you about this. The Comic Journal has faced a lot of lawsuits over the years. So, which has been your favorite lawsuit?
Oh, my favorite lawsuit. Well, I guess my favorite lawsuit was the one that took 7 years to resolve, and I don't know if anyone here has been involved in a lawsuit, but they are a complete nightmare. I mean, they cost thousands, tens of thousands of dollars to fight, and they just take enormous amounts of time. And there's one lawsuit. We were sued by a writer named Michael Fleischer. It took 7 years to resolve this. And it's 7 years of legal hassles, of legal negotiations, of what's called depositions, where you get other people into a room and you interrogate them for days on end. I mean, it really was a nightmare, but I mean, back then I was full of adrenaline and I was ready to fight this to the death. And it culminated in a 4-week jury trial in New York City. I was on the witness stand for like 4 days.
Okay.
It was pretty heady.
So that's your favorite one?
And we won. The important thing is we won.
All right. Okay, what was your initial thinking that went into forming the Kirby Awards and later the Harvey Awards?
I don't even know how you found out that I created the Harvey Awards, because nobody knows this.
The internet.
And it's not even on the Harvey Awards website. If you go there, my name isn't even mentioned. Well, I think we created the Kirby Award. I mean, this is when I was young and naive. Now I hate all awards. I think all awards are useless. But I thought that we could create an award system that would respect great work. Well, that didn't work. So we created the Kirby Awards after Jack Kirby. There was some enormous and tedious controversy that occurred about the third or fourth year of the Kirby Awards, and the Kirby Awards split off into 2 awards. One was named after Will Eisner, one was named after Harvey Kurtzman. I knew Harvey, and I called him up, and I basically asked him if he'd be willing to, put his name, use his name for an award, and he did. He was very happy to do that. And for the first few years, it was great. They really did reward great work. Harvey himself attended the awards. They were terrific. It was a dinner banquet, really dignified affair. And then I guess, like most things, it just degenerated. And now it's sort of meaningless. So I'm very sorry you dug that information up, but I have to talk about it.
All right. Fantagraphics has become a stalwart in the alternative comic scene. What are your views on the larger mainstream comic publishers? And what about the small and independent comics?
Well, I hate them, of course. I mean, I must have given a much better answer, there. In the 70s and 80s, we were in direct conflict with them because they represented something. I mean, they represented this monolith that we were fighting against. And although that's still true and they still represent this monolith, they're now only in my peripheral vision. I mean, you can't sustain that kind of loathing for that long without going crazy. So I don't really think of them anymore. But I'm sure they're just as thoroughly rotten as they ever were.
All right. Who would you want to illustrate the comic book adaptation of your life?
The comic book adaptation of my life. I want that man right there to do that. And if he could do it like tomorrow, that would be great.
All right. I'll take questions from the audience now.
It could be like a one-page condensation. Just the highlights.
Can it be done, sir?
Can it be done, sir?
Half a page.
Half a
He's
page.
agreed to half a page.
Like 2 panels is all I could afford. So.
Okay, anybody in the audience has any questions, we'll take them now.
Are you looking for any content from India?
I'm sorry.
Are you looking for any content from Indian writers?
You know, I mean, I'm sort of looking for content everywhere, and I'd be more, yeah, I'd be very happy to see work from any Indian cartoonists. We publish a lot of European cartoonists, South American cartoonists, one South African cartoonist. So we're very interested in publishing internationally.
No, as writers.
So
I
yes.
mean.
Well,
Content
we
writers.
don't publish only I mean, one of the things about our company is that we almost always publish cartoonists. That is, people who write and draw their own work. And if you're a writer, you're going to have a hard time because you have to find an artist.
But if we do have an artist,
But if you have it, yes, if you have an artist you're working with, yes,
Thanks.
sure.
Is that clear? So, independent and underground comics, obviously, when you are against such big names as DC and Marvel, which generally like sell a lot and obviously have like a massive readership because everyone starts off with them and then realize what underground comics and what the strength is. But to do underground comics, what were the like constraints or the difficulties you had to go through, and the like such as the financial constraints? How did you sustain yourself? And did you there was like a job thing you do and work at night to get these things which you want out to market?
You mean at the very beginning?
Yeah.
Oh yeah. When we were putting out the Comics Journal in 1976, and for about 2 or 3 years, I held jobs because the Comics Journal couldn't support me. So I worked a succession of terrible jobs. I was a typesetter where I sat and typed for like 8 hours a day. A typesetter is just someone who comes in and looks at a manuscript and types it into a computer. And the thing was that I could type 100 words a minute with 2 fingers. And I would take a typing test, and I would type 100 words a minute, the 5-minute typing test. But the problem is, I couldn't sustain that for more than about 5 minutes because my 2 fingers would get really tired. So I would get these jobs under, illegitimate pretense, and then I would inevitably keep the job for a few months and then get fired because, I was a lousy employee. So I had a succession of miserable jobs. I also worked as a temp. I don't know if you know what a temp is, like a temporary employee. You go to an agency and you sign up. I take the 5-minute typing test. I think I can type 100 words a minute for 8 hours, and they fire me out to big corporations. And I loved that because you could go to these big corporations as a temp and not really have to work. You just sit in the chair. You occasionally do what they tell you to do, and I could actually bring the work from home that I wanted to do on the Comics Journal and do work in these big corporate offices. So I did that for like 2 or 3 years, from 1976 to about 79, before the Comics Journal could make a bare subsistence living for me.
You have published such great comics, so I need to ask which comical character has been your favorite, or is your still personal favorite? Which comic character?
My personal favorite comic character? Now?
Now or just favorite?
Well, I got to tell you, I don't really think in terms of favorite comic characters, but if I had to pick one, it would probably be one of Jaime Hernandez's characters, like Maggie, who I've read about for 30 years now, and is such a fully realized character that you got to love her.
Hi. Yeah, thanks for the chat. And I was just curious, while you were making the presentation, for all these years you would have had cartoons coming out of your ears.
Yes.
And were you at any point a closet cartoonist yourself, and were you tempted to, draw your own cartoon book?
When I was a kid, I did draw my own comics. And I realized at a really early age that I had no skill to draw. I mean, I drew I drew my own comic books of a cast of characters called the Metal Men, which DC Comics published in the 60s. And I drew comics of the Metal Men. I drew it specifically because they didn't have to look like human beings. So they suited my absolutely abysmal drawing sense. You could draw them, looking like anything, because they would transmogrify themselves into walls or hammers or whatever. And that's the only thing I was capable of drawing. But no, I didn't draw. I mean, I write about cartooning and I write about comics because I think I can write reasonably well. But I had no skill drawing at all.
You did have part of your initial presentation where you talk about the fan comics, the fan mags. That was you drawing, right? Initially?
That was me tracing.
Tracing. Okay.
Tracing.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, I traced them off of comic books. I would love to be able to draw, but
Hi, Gary.
hi.
I have come to know from your chat that you have always been loggerheads with the big guns like DC and Marvel and whoever, Image Comics, Todd McFarlane, we can understand that. But how would you advise a growing economy like India, where we are actually trying to, project comics as like, a high-yield business module, like the way DC and Marvel has done. Because as you see, without the money, we can't do anything. Like until and unless big money is coming in, we cannot produce comics. So basically, if the big guys go away, or they die, or they don't develop, so how will the small guys will survive? So I'd like to know about it. Like, what do you think about this?
Okay, I'm not sure if I understand your question. Your question is, what do I think of like big?
No, how would you advise a growing economy like India, where comics is still in its very nascent stage and it's trying to grow? So what is happening, like without big guns like DC, Marvel, large houses giving money for making comics, creating a very, very alluring looking comic book out of it. Like maybe you can say like the Ultimates or something like that.
Well, I'm not sure I'm qualified to give very good advice because I know so little of the Indian publishing environment. But, the thing is that cartoonists, they really have to stick to their guns. And cartoonists either have to self-publish their work, they have to get it on the internet. I mean, they have to do whatever they have to do to get their vision across and to not compromise.
Thank you so much.
I mean, it's possible that you can compromise by doing work on the side that you have to do to make money, illustration work, or even comics. But you have to do your own work, and you just have to stick to that. And eventually, as what happened in the United States is that the cartoonists who did stick to that vision ultimately became successful. But it's really, really difficult. And I assume it's probably more difficult here than it probably is in the U.S. at the moment, because we went through that whole period. I don't know if that's helpful at all, but
Next question.
Hey, over here.
I can't see anything out there, by the way.
So it doesn't matter if I stand up or not. So what I was saying, I saw towards the end of your presentation that you said you'd be printing old EC comics from the 50s.
Yes.
And 40s. So I was wondering if you'd be printing Tales from the Crypt, and also whether they'd be available in India, because you don't really get this kind of stuff in India, whether your comics will be in India.
Right. Well, we will be publishing Tales from the Crypt. And like I said, we'll be publishing them by individual artists. So we'll be publishing a collection of Jack Davis's
Exactly.
work,
Jack Davis and
Graham Ingalls, and so on. So yes, we'll be publishing every EC book. The horror, the science fiction, the war comics, the suspense. As for whether they'll be available in India, I don't know. It's possible to license the books to be published in India, but of course that requires an Indian publisher to do that. Otherwise, I understand that our books are available erratically here in India, either through the internet or the very few the stores.
Problem, as in, I mean, suspense stories and stuff like that. It's very difficult to get it in India. I mean, unless you cog it off the internet or something. So
I know. Well, we opened a store in Seattle, Washington. I wish we could open a store in Delhi, but of course, you can always order them off Amazon. But I understand
delivers in India, does it?
that's very expensive. Well, I think you can order them straight from the States and get them shipped over here, but I mean that's probably very expensive.
Yeah.
I don't have an easy answer, although I wish I did. I'd like to sell books in India.
Hi, Gary. Hi. I think you cannot see me all right. I was just going through the presentation and you were talking about the underground comics movement. It's really interesting for me. I just wanted to know, and I had few ideas I want to throw around with a few of my artist friends. So what I want to know is during that period, when we talk about underground comics, what references made directly, the political situation? Are you guys named the politicians, or you were using some other names? Or, were you taking a direct route or direct dig on, the political scenario or the entertainment scenario around you? Or was it always indirect? Like, you will not probably name the president, use some other name instead of the, whatever the name of the president was that time.
Okay, well, if I understand your question correctly, the underground comics published in the 60s and 70s were incredibly confrontational. There was a political dimension to them. The reason that they came into existence is because there was a kind of political and social confluence. There was the civil rights movement in the 1960s. There was the anti-Vietnam movement in the 1960s. There was that whole revolutionary fervor. And underground cartoonists were very much a child of that social context. I'm not sure if that actually answers your question or not, but they were very confrontational and they were very political.
Kind of that answered my question, but just the thing where what I really wanted to know is, let's say, for example, if I want to make underground comics and if I'm taking dig on Bush, for example.
Yes.
So will I directly, were the artists referring Bush directly like Bush, or calling him Kush or something else?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, in fact, in 2004, we published a book called The Bush Hunter, which dissected the Bush administration. It was my attempt to defeat him in the 2004 election, which obviously didn't work. But we named names. We had short pieces about everybody in the Bush administration, like short histories of Condoleezza Rice and Rumsfeld and that whole gang of thugs that populated the Bush administration at the time.
All right, thanks, Gary.
These days we read a lot about the long tail effect, that you have a lot of market for niche products, but the hits are not as long lasting as they once used to be.
Sorry, what isn't as long lasting?
I said these days we hear a lot about the long tail effect. You know the long tail effect, that you have a spike which is a hit, and then you have a graph which is falling slowly because there's a lot of demand for niche products. But hits do not tend to be as durable or as persistent as they used to be, say, in the 60s and 70s, that you create a hit franchise and that lasts for, say, 5 or 10 or 15 years. And what do you think the effect of that will be? Because do you think that there will be enduring characters that come out from, say, the late 90s and the 2000s that are remembered 20 years later? Or do you think that the era of long-lived hits, the Archies and the Superman and the Richie Rich, is gone forever? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, mainstream comics and characters like Superman and Batman in comic book form no longer really make any money. The only reason that they're produced is so they can be sold to movies, where they do make money. So film has essentially taken over the role that comic books had. I think the era of having a character as popular as Superman or Batman or Spider-Man being created or generated in comic books is over. And if anything, you might have those characters generated in film. But essentially, comic books, mainstream comic books, are feed farms for the film industry and the television industry. And they don't themselves make any money or sell very many books. When I was a kid growing up in the 60s, a lot of kids read comic books. Now in the United States, very few kids read comic books. What sustains the industry are people in their 40s and 50s who remember reading comic books and still want to read the same kinds of lousy comics they read when they were 12. And again, I'm sorry, I'm not sure that answers your question, but...
It did. Thanks. Thanks a lot.
Any other questions? All right. I guess that's it. Thanks very much for being with us here, Gary.
Thank you.
And it's an honor to have you here. Thanks a lot.
Well, it's an honor to be here. Thank you very much. Thanks.